Elena Cortez always parked her old blue sedan in the same spot behind the community center, tucked away where no one would notice the rust forming around the wheel wells. Tuesday afternoons were reserved for her youngest students, the beginners with tiny fingers who still counted out loud as they played. She loved these hours the most, watching small faces scrunch in concentration, their pride when they finally mastered "Mary Had a Little Lamb" without a single mistake. As the last student gathered her sheet music and skipped toward her waiting mother, Elena began her closing routine. She straightened the bench, wiped down the keys of the upright piano that had been donated to the center 15 years ago, and checked that all the lights were turned off in the practice room. "Almost forgot this came for you," said Doris, the center's secretary handing over a cream-colored envelope as Elena signed out in the logbook. "For me?" Elena asked, surprised by the weight of the paper and the embossed return address from the Hartwick Concert Hall in the city. She slipped it into her bag to read later, thinking it must be a fundraising letter or subscription offer. Home was a small house on Maple Street where Elena had lived for 30 years. She'd moved in as a newlywed with Carlos, fresh with dreams of opening their own music school someday. The school never materialized. Small towns had limited demand for piano lessons. But Elena had built a modest reputation as a patient, kind-hearted teacher who charged less than she should. She set her bag on the kitchen counter and prepared a cup of tea, her evening ritual before grading her students' music theory worksheets. The envelope caught her eye again. She ran her finger under the seal and pulled out a letter and an elegantly designed invitation. "Dear Ms. Cortez," it began, "at the recommendation of Lily Chen, we would like to extend a personal invitation to our annual master's piano recital." Elena nearly dropped her teacup. Lily Chen had been her student almost 20 years ago, a brilliant girl who went on to study music at a prestigious conservatory. Elena had followed her career from afar, collecting newspaper clippings when Lily performed with orchestras around the country. But they had lost touch years ago. The letter continued, explaining that Lily now worked as an assistant director for the Hartwick concert series. "Lily has spoken highly of your influence on her early musical development and suggested you might enjoy our program featuring international pianists, followed by our traditional open piano session where selected attendees may play." Elena set the invitation on the table and walked to her own piano in the living room, a baby grand that had been Carlos's wedding gift to her. She rested her hands on the closed lid, feeling the cool wood beneath her palms. How long had it been since she'd played for anyone other than her students or herself? The recital was only 2 weeks away. That night she dreamed of concert halls and spotlights. She woke feeling foolish. "You're being ridiculous," she told her reflection the next morning. "You're a piano teacher from a small town, not a performer." Still, she found herself pulling out the folder of compositions she'd written over the years, pieces that no one had ever heard. Later that day, between students, she called Lily's office number from the invitation. "Elena, I was hoping you'd call." Lily's voice came through, warm with genuine pleasure. "Will you come?" "Please say yes. It's very kind of you to think of me, but—" "No buts. You were the one who showed me what music could be. I still remember how you played that Chopin nocturne when I was struggling with it. You closed your eyes and it was like the piano became part of you." Elena smiled at the memory. "That was a long time ago. Not so long. And the open session is perfect. Just a casual chance for music lovers to share something. Most people have left by then anyway, just the diehards remain. You could play one of your own pieces." Elena's heart skipped. "How did you know I compose?" "You showed me once, remember? That piece you wrote after your trip to the coast. I never forgot it, had she?" Elena vaguely remembered sharing a composition with an enthusiastic teenaged Lily. "I don't know. Just come. Watch the performances. You don't have to play if you don't want to, but it would mean a lot to me to see you there." After they hung up, Elena opened her composition book to a piece she'd written 3 years after Carlos passed away. She hadn't played it in months. Her fingers found the keys and she began to play softly at first, then with growing confidence as the melody carried her through the familiar emotional landscape of loss and eventual acceptance. When she finished, she realized she'd left the window open, and Mrs. Patel from next door was standing in her garden, looking over. "That was beautiful," her neighbor called. "I've never heard that one before." Elena felt her cheeks warm. "Just something I wrote," she said, embarrassed by the attention. You should play it for more people than just me and my tomato plants. For the next week, Elena found herself practicing late into the evening. Not just her own compositions, but pieces she had loved teaching over the years. Her fingers felt stiff at first. Teaching beginners rarely required her to maintain the technical skills needed for advanced pieces, but muscle memory gradually returned. The Sunday before the recital, she opened her closet and surveyed her options. Nothing seemed right for a fancy concert hall. She eventually pulled out a navy blue dress she'd worn to her niece's wedding 2 years ago, simple but elegant enough. She tried it on and stood before the mirror, trying to see herself as others might. A woman of 58 looked back at her. Silver threads wove through her dark hair and laugh lines framed her eyes. Not a concert pianist, just Elena Cortez, who taught children to play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star and composed music no one heard. You don't have to play, she reminded herself. Just go and enjoy the music. The night before the recital, Elena received a text message from Lily. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. The open session starts at 9. Maestro Vitali will be there. He's the visiting director this season, and he's brilliant. Intimidating, but brilliant. Elena looked up Vittorio Vitali online and immediately regretted it. The man was legendary, having conducted major orchestras worldwide and discovered some of the finest pianists of the current generation. The article mentioned his unflinching standards and brutal honesty about mediocrity. Well, that settles it, Elena said to her empty living room. I'm definitely not playing. Still, she packed her composition notebook into her bag the next morning, just in case. The drive to the city took almost 2 hours. Elena had mapped it carefully, worried about finding parking and arriving on time. She'd only been to the Hartwick Concert Hall once before, on a school field trip with her students years ago. As she approached the imposing building with its modern glass facade, Elena felt increasingly out of place. Young music students hurried past her, carrying instrument cases and talking excitedly. Well-dressed couples strolled arm in arm toward the entrance. She smoothed her dress and touched her hair, suddenly conscious of every gray strand. Inside, the lobby bustled with activity. Elena checked her coat and clutched her small handbag, trying to look like she belonged. The usher showed her to her seat, not in the back as she'd expected, but in the middle section with a perfect view of the stage and the gleaming grand piano waiting there. Ms. Cortez? A young woman approached, her face brightening with recognition. It's me, Lily. Elena stood to embrace her former student, now a poised professional woman. Lily, you look wonderful. I'm so glad you came. The program is amazing tonight. Wait until you hear Yoshi Tanaka play the Rachmaninoff. And I've added your name to the open session list. Just a formality, it helps us keep track of who's interested. Oh, I don't think... No pressure, Lily said, squeezing her hand. But the option is there. I need to run. Enjoy the performance. As Lily hurried away, Elena sank back into her seat, both thrilled and terrified. Her name was on a list. People might expect her to play. She opened her program and tried to focus on the names and pieces listed there, pushing away thoughts of the open session hours away. The lights dimmed, and Elena felt herself relax as the first pianist took the stage. Music had always been her sanctuary, and tonight she could simply listen, lose herself in the beauty created by others' hands. As the magnificent sounds of the concert grand filled the hall, Elena closed her eyes and let herself be carried away, forgetting for a moment her own small place in the world of music, and the invitation that might, just might, change everything. Elena watched in awe as the third pianist of the evening took a deep bow. The audience erupted in applause, some people even standing. The young man couldn't have been more than 25, yet his fingers had flown across the keys with such confidence that Elena had found herself holding her breath during his performance. Remarkable control, whispered the woman seated next to her. An elegant lady with silver hair and a string of pearls. He studied with Maestro Vitali, you know. Elena nodded politely, though she hadn't known. She glanced toward the front row where she could see the back of the maestro's head. Salt and pepper hair, straight shoulders in a perfectly tailored suit. Even from behind he looked intimidating. Twice already she had watched him stand to congratulate performers with a firm handshake, his face serious even as the audience cheered around him. During intermission, Elena stayed in her seat while others filed out to the lobby for refreshments. She opened her composition notebook and stared at the notes she had written years ago. What had seemed beautiful and meaningful in her living room now looked amateur and simple compared to the complex pieces she had just heard. She closed the notebook and slipped it back into her bag. Her decision made. She would enjoy the rest of the performances and then quietly leave before the open session. Lily would understand. A soft chime signaled the end of intermission and people returned to their seats. The second half began with a pianist from South Korea whose delicate interpretation of Debussy made Elena close her eyes to better absorb the cascading. Notes that sounded like raindrops on water. Between performances, Elena spotted Lily near the stage, clipboard in hand, speaking with various staff members. Once Lily caught her eye and gave an encouraging smile and thumbs up. Elena returned the smile weakly. Time seemed to both crawl and fly. Before she knew it, the final scheduled performer was taking her bows and the house lights came up slightly. Many audience members began gathering their things, but a significant number remained seated, chatting excitedly. Elena reached for her bag, ready to make a quick exit, when the elegant woman beside her touched her arm. "Are you staying for the open session? I hear it's quite something, sometimes even better than the main program. More heart, less technique." I was planning to head home," Elena stammered. "Oh, you should stay. Last year, a nurse from the children's hospital played something she had composed for her patients. Not technically perfect, but there wasn't a dry eye in the house." Elena hesitated, her hand still on her bag. The woman's words stirred something in her. Maybe she could just listen to a few of the open session performers before slipping out. Lily appeared on stage now, adjusting the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for staying for our traditional open session. This is a cherished part of our annual recital, where we invite gifted amateurs and music lovers to share their passion with us." Elena settled back into her seat, deciding to stay just a little longer. "We have several pianists signed up tonight," Lily continued, consulting her clipboard. "First, we welcome Dr. Thomas Wilson, a neurologist and lifelong piano enthusiast." A tall man in his 60s approached the stage to polite applause. His playing was competent but cautious, a Chopin waltz performed with precision if not passion. When he finished, Maestro Vitali gave a single nod, which seemed to please Dr. Wilson immensely. 3 more performers followed: a young college student, a retired music teacher, and a woman who had recently returned to piano after a 30-year hiatus. Each received courteous applause. The maestro remained attentive but offered little reaction beyond occasional nods. Elena watched the clock on the wall. It was getting late and her drive home was long. She should leave now. But just as she gathered her courage to stand, Lily announced the next performer, a teenage boy who played with surprising emotional depth. Elena found herself drawn back into the music, her departure postponed again. More names were called. More pianists played. The audience thinned gradually, but those who remained seemed genuinely interested in each performance. Elena noticed Lily glancing her way occasionally, a question in her eyes. Each time, Elena looked down, avoiding her former student's gaze. "We have time for just a few more performers," Lily announced after a young woman finished a lively ragtime piece. She consulted her clipboard. "Next we have Mr. Huang, who will play his own arrangement of a traditional Chinese folk song." As Mr. Huang approached the piano, Elena finally gathered her courage. This was her moment to leave while attention was focused elsewhere. She picked up her bag and coat and stood as quietly as possible, intending to slip out the side door, but as she edged along her row, apologizing softly to those she passed, the strap of her bag caught on an armrest. Her composition notebook tumbled out, pages fluttering open on the floor. Flustered, she knelt to retrieve it, aware of curious glances from nearby audience members. By the time she had collected her belongings and reached the exit, Mr. Huang had finished playing. Elena paused at the door, not wanting to leave during the applause. It seemed disrespectful. She would wait for the next performer to begin. "Thank you, Mr. Huang," Lily said into the microphone. Then she scanned the remaining audience. "Next on our list, Elena Cortés." Elena froze, one hand on the exit door. She hadn't expected Lily to actually call her name, especially not so late in the program. Surely she could see Elena was trying to leave. A spotlight swept the audience, searching for her. Elena pressed herself against the wall, hoping to remain unseen, but the elegant woman who had sat beside her was now standing and pointing in her direction. "She's over there." "By the exit!" The spotlight found her, illuminating her navy blue dress and her deer-in-headlights expression. Elena blinked against the sudden brightness, her heart pounding in her chest. "Elena." "There you are," Lily called, her voice warm through the microphone. "Please come join us. We've been saving a special spot for you in our program." All eyes turned toward Elena. She felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. There was no graceful way to refuse now, not with everyone watching. With a small, tight smile, she turned from the exit and began the long walk toward the stage. Clutching her notebook to her chest like a shield, the grand piano looked enormous as she approached, much larger and more imposing than her baby grand at home. The spotlight followed her, making her feel exposed and vulnerable. She glanced at the audience, now just shadowy figures beyond the bright lights, and then at Lily, who gave her an encouraging smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, Elena Cortez was my first piano teacher, the person who showed me that music is more than just notes on a page. It's an honor to welcome her tonight." There was polite applause as Elena reached the piano bench. She sat down carefully, adjusting her dress, and placed her notebook on the music stand. Her hands were trembling. "What will you be playing for us this evening?" Lily asked. Elena leaned toward the microphone. "A small piece I composed some years ago," she said, her voice barely audible. She cleared her throat and tried again. "It's called After Rain." She positioned her hands over the keys but couldn't bring herself to begin. The silence stretched uncomfortably. From the corner of her eye, she could see Maestro Vitali checking his watch. A few audience members shifted in their seats. Elena took a deep breath and closed her eyes. She thought of her small house on Maple Street, of her students with their eager faces, of Carlos who had believed in her talent even when she doubted herself. She thought of rainy afternoons spent at her piano while the world outside washed clean, and then she began to play. The first notes came hesitantly, her fingers still not quite believing they were touching this magnificent instrument on this intimidating stage. But as the familiar melody emerged, Elena felt herself relax slightly. This was her music, her story. No one else could tell it quite the way she could. She kept her eyes closed, focusing on the feeling of the keys beneath her fingers, on the emotion she had poured into this composition during those lonely days after Carlos was gone. The piece was about finding beauty after sorrow, about the way the world glistens after rain. Halfway through, she dared to open her eyes. The spotlight still blinded her to most of the audience, but she could make out Lily standing at the side of the stage, one hand pressed to her heart. And in the front row, Maestro Vitali had stopped checking his watch. His head was tilted slightly, his attention fully on her playing. Elena's confidence grew. Her fingers moved more surely now, bringing out nuances in the music that she sometimes missed when practicing at home. The magnificent piano responded to her touch with a richness of tone that her old baby grand couldn't match. As she approached the final movement of her piece, the part 2, where the melody resolved into a hopeful theme that always made her think of sunrise, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The pure joy of sharing her music with others who were truly listening. The last notes lingered in the air and then faded into silence. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. Elena sat still, her hands resting lightly on the keys, uncertain what would happen next. Had they hated it? Was the silence a polite way of acknowledging her amateur status? She finally looked up, ready to make a quick exit from the stage, and saw Maestro Vitali rising slowly from his seat, his eyes fixed on her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Elena held her breath as Maestro Vitali stood from his seat in the front row. His face remained unreadable, neither impressed nor disappointed. He simply nodded once, the same courteous acknowledgement he had given the other amateur performers, before glancing toward Lily as if to ask, "Who's next?" The audience applauded politely. Not the standing ovation that some of the evening's featured pianists had received, but respectful enough. Elena felt a curious mix of relief and disappointment wash over her. What had she expected? That a simple piece composed at her kitchen table would suddenly make the great Maestro Vitali take notice? "Thank you, Elena," Lily said into the microphone, giving her former teacher an encouraging smile. "That was beautiful." Elena closed her notebook, her hands no longer trembling but suddenly very tired. She stood and gave a small bow before making her way off the stage. The spotlight followed her briefly, then swung back to Lily. "Next, we welcome Mr. Richard Tanner, who will play Beethoven's Für Elise." As Elena returned to her seat, a few people nodded appreciatively, and the elegant woman with the pearls whispered, "Lovely composition." So heartfelt. Elena smiled her thanks. But all she wanted now was to gather her things and slip away unnoticed. She waited until Mr. Tanner began playing the familiar opening notes of Fur Elise before standing quietly. This time no one noticed as she edged along her row and made her way to the exit. In the lobby, she retrieved her coat from the coat check and stepped out into the cool night air. The parking garage was 2 blocks away. Elena walked slowly, replaying the events of the evening in her mind. She had done it. She had played her own composition on a concert grand piano at Hartwick Concert Hall. That alone was something she could treasure, even if Maestro Vitali hadn't been moved by her music. "You did what you came to do," she told herself. "Now you can go home and tell your students you played on the same stage as famous pianists." The parking garage was nearly empty this late in the evening. Elena paid the attendant and made her way to the 3rd level where she had parked her old blue sedan. As she approached her car, she dug through her bag for her keys, already thinking about the long drive home and the early morning lessons she had scheduled for tomorrow. "Ms. Cortez," the voice echoed in the concrete structure. Elena turned to see Lily hurrying toward her, high heels clicking against the pavement. "Lily? What are you doing here?" Lily stopped, slightly out of breath. "You left. The open session just finished and I wanted to talk to you. The attendant said you'd just come up here. I'm sorry. I thought it would be better to leave quietly. It's a long drive home and I have students early tomorrow." Lily shook her head. "But didn't you hear? Didn't you see?" "See what?" "After you played, Maestro Vitali asked who you were." Elena blinked in surprise.
"He did?" "Yes."
"He turned to me right after you left the stage and asked, 'Who is this woman? Where did she study?' I told him you were my first teacher, that you taught piano in a small town." He seemed intrigued. A small flutter of pride stirred in Elena's chest, but she quickly tamped it down. "That's kind of him, but I'm sure he was just being polite." "No, Elena. Maestro Vitali is never just polite. If he doesn't like something, he says nothing at all. The fact that he asked about you, that means something." Elena unlocked her car door. "Well, it was nice of him to take an interest, but I really should be going." Lily put her hand on Elena's arm. "He wants to hear more." "What?" "He asked if you had other compositions. I told him you had dozens that you've been composing for years." Elena's eyes widened. "Lily, why would you tell him that?" "Because it's true. Remember all those pieces you showed me when I was your student? The ones you kept in that green folder? You said you composed whenever you felt something too deeply for words." Elena leaned against her car. It was true. She had been composing since she was a teenager. Over the years, the green folder had become 2, then 3. Most were simple pieces, expressions of moments in her life. Her wedding day. The afternoon she and Carlos picked apples in the orchard outside town. The morning she woke up and realized she could finally think of him without that sharp pain in her chest. "Those were just for me," she said softly. "Personal things. But they're good, Elena. What you played tonight, it was different from everything else we heard. Not technically perfect, maybe, but it had heart." Maestro Vitali noticed that. Elena shook her head, unable to process what Lily was telling her. "So what are you saying? What does he want?" "He wants you to come back tomorrow. There's a master class in the morning that he's teaching, but he has some free time in the afternoon. He'd like you to play more of your compositions for him." "Tomorrow? But I have students cancel them." "Just this once. This is Vittorio Vitali, Elena. Do you know how many pianists would give anything for 15 minutes of his attention?" Elena opened her car door and set her bag on the passenger seat. Her mind was racing. "I don't know, Lily, I'm not a performer. I'm just a piano teacher from a small town. What if he hates everything else I've written? What if tonight was just a fluke?" Lily's expression softened. "What if it wasn't? What if this is your chance to have your music heard by someone who can really appreciate it? Someone who might even help others hear it too?" Elena thought of her compositions, pieces of her heart translated into music over the years. She had never imagined them being played anywhere but in her living room. "I'll think about it," she finally said. "Promise? Because I need to tell him something tonight." Elena nodded slowly. "I promise I'll think about it." Lily seemed to sense this was the best she could hope for. She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. "Here's my number. Text me your decision, even if it's late. I'm staying at the Hotel Monroe just down the street from the concert hall." Elena took the card and slipped it into her coat pocket. "Thank you for everything, Lily. For inviting me tonight, for encouraging me to play." Lily smiled. "You did the same for me once. Remember when I was 12 and terrified to play in that student recital? You told me that music isn't about being perfect, it's about sharing something true." They hugged goodbye and Elena got into her car. As she drove out of the parking garage and onto the city streets, her mind kept returning to Maestro Vitali's question. Who is this woman? The drive home seemed both longer and shorter than usual. Elena's thoughts raced between excitement and anxiety. Several times she nearly pulled over to text Lily a firm no. But something kept her from doing it. A small voice that whispered, "What if?" It was past midnight when Elena finally turned onto Maple Street. Her house was dark except for the porch light she had left on. Inside, everything was exactly as she had left it that morning. Dishes drying in the rack, student worksheets stacked neatly on the coffee table, her everyday life waiting for her return. She set her keys and bag on the kitchen counter and walked to the living room where her baby Gran stood by the window. Without turning on the lights, she sat on the bench and placed her hands on the cool keys. "Am I being foolish?" she asked the empty room. She began to play softly, not her performance piece from earlier, but something different. Something she had composed last summer while watching fireflies from her back porch. It was a gentle, wistful melody that reminded her of childhood evenings and possibilities that glow briefly before fading into the night. When she finished playing, Elna sat in the darkness for a long moment. Then she took out her phone and Lily's card and typed a message. "I'll be there." "What time?" The response came almost immediately. 2 p.m., practice room C, bring all your compositions. "You won't regret this." Elena set her phone down and looked around her familiar living room. For 30 years, this had been enough, teaching her students, playing her piano, composing music that no one heard. She had built a quiet life that suited her, a life without spotlights or scrutiny. Tomorrow that might change. For better or worse, someone important would hear her music and judge it worthy or lacking. The thought terrified her, but beneath the fear was something else, a flutter of excitement she hadn't felt in years. Elena stood and walked to her bedroom, where she pulled a small suitcase from the closet. If she was going to meet Maestro Vitali tomorrow, she would need to stay in the city tonight. No more driving back and forth. As she packed a few essentials, she tried to imagine what she would play for him. Which pieces would best represent her work? Which ones would she be least embarrassed to share with a man who had heard the world's greatest pianists? Just be honest, she told herself, remembering the advice she gave her nervous students before recitals. Play from your heart, and the notes will take care of themselves. Elena zipped her suitcase and then went to her study to collect her composition folders. She would need to leave early in the morning to check into a hotel and prepare for her 2 p.m. appointment, an appointment she had never dreamed possible just 24 hours ago. Before going to bed, she called the parents of tomorrow's students and left apologetic messages about a sudden opportunity that required her to reschedule. Then she set her alarm for 6 a.m. and lay down, certain she wouldn't sleep a wink. But she did sleep, and she dreamed of music, not the grand, complex pieces she had heard at the recital, but simple melodies that spoke of real life with all its joys and sorrows. In her dreams, people listened and understood what she was trying to say through her music. And that, Elena realized as she drifted deeper into sleep, was all she had ever wanted. Elena arrived at the Hartwick Concert Hall shortly after noon, her 3 folders of compositions tucked safely in her tote bag. She had barely slept, despite checking into a modest hotel just a few blocks from the hall. All-night melodies had swirled through her mind, each piece presenting itself for consideration, then retreating as she questioned its worth. The grand lobby was quiet today, nothing like the bustling scene from last night's recital. A young man at the information desk looked up as she approached. "I'm here to see Maestro Vitali," Elena said, her voice steadier than she expected. "I believe I'm expected at 2 o'clock. The young man checked a schedule. "Ms. Cortez?" "Yes. The maestro is still in his master class. It should end around 1:30. Would you like to wait in practice room C? It's been reserved for your meeting." Elena nodded and followed his directions down a hallway lined with photographs of famous musicians who had performed at Hartwick over the years. She recognized some faces, legendary pianists whose recordings she had played for her students. conductors whose names were spoken with reverence in the music world. Practice Room C was smaller than she had imagined, but still elegant with its high ceiling and excellent acoustics. A baby grand piano, not the concert grand from last night, but still a beautiful instrument, waited in the center of the room. Elena set her bag on a nearby chair and approached the piano cautiously, as if it might object to her presence. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them, feeling the smooth ivory beneath her fingertips. Then she pulled back, suddenly worried about warming up. Would Maestro Vitali want to hear her play fresh without preparation? Or would he think her unprofessional if she didn't warm up? After a moment's hesitation, Elena decided to warm up briefly. She began with simple scales and arpeggios, letting her fingers remember their purpose. The piano responded beautifully, its tone rich and clear. Gradually, she transitioned into one of her simpler compositions, a piece she had written years ago after watching a summer rainstorm from her porch. She became so absorbed in the music that she didn't hear the door open. Only when she finished the piece and looked up did she realize she was no longer alone. Maestro Vitali stood just inside the doorway, his expression thoughtful. He was shorter than she had expected, with deep-set eyes that seemed to look through rather than at her. Behind him stood Lily, who gave Elena an encouraging smile. "Please," the maestro said in a lightly accented voice, "don't stop on my account." He moved further into the room, pulling a chair closer to the piano. "That was not the piece you played last night." "No," Elena replied, her mouth suddenly dry. "That was something different. Something older. You composed it?" "Yes," he nodded, his face still unreadable. "Lily tells me you have been composing for many years." "Since I was young," Elena admitted. "But just for myself. No one really hears my pieces except my students sometimes. And yet you decided to play one last night. Why?" The question caught Elena off guard. She hadn't expected such directness. I'm not sure. Lily encouraged me. And the piece I played, it's special to me." "Special how?" Elena hesitated, unused to discussing the personal meanings behind her music. "I wrote it after my husband passed away. Not right after, but years later, when I realized that grief had changed into something else, something that still held the memory of pain but wasn't painful anymore." Maestro Vitali's expression softened slightly. Music can express what words cannot. "Yes," Elena said, relieved that he understood. "Exactly that." He gestured toward her bag. "Lily mentioned you brought other compositions." "I did." Elena retrieved the folders and set them on the piano. "They're organized by year, more or less. The most recent ones are in the blue folder." Maestro Vitali stood and came to the piano. He opened the blue folder and began to leaf through the pages, his eyes scanning the handwritten notes. Occasionally he would pause, his fingers tapping silently on the edge of the piano as if playing a passage in his mind. "These are all original compositions?" he asked. "Yes, some are very simple. Teaching pieces for my students. And the others?" Elena's cheeks warmed. "Just things I felt. Moments I wanted to remember." The maestro selected a page from the middle of the folder and placed it on the music stand. "This one. Play this for me." Elena looked at the title, First Snow. She had written it 2 winters ago after waking to find the world transformed by an unexpected overnight snowfall. The piece captured that moment of wonder, of seeing familiar things made new by a blanket of white. She positioned her hands over the keys and began to play. The opening was delicate, high, soft notes that fell like the first hesitant snowflakes. Gradually, the piece built, adding deeper tones as the snow accumulated in the music just as it had outside her window that morning. As she played, Elena forgot to be nervous. She forgot that Maestro Vitali was watching, that Lily was holding her breath by the door, that this moment might change something in her quiet life. She remembered only the beauty of that winter morning and how compelled she had felt to capture it in music. When the final notes faded, there was silence in the practice room. Elena kept her hands on the keys, afraid to look up and see disappointment or worse, indifference on the maestro's face. "Another," he said simply. He chose 4 more pieces from her folders, each time listening intently as Elena played. She could not read his reactions. His face remained composed, giving away nothing of his thoughts. After the 4th piece, he held up his hand. "Enough," he said. "I have heard enough." Elena's heart sank. Had she bored him? Disappointed him? She closed the cover over the keys, preparing herself for a polite dismissal. "Ms. Cortez," the maestro said, his voice formal but not unkind. "How long have you been teaching piano?" 30 years, she replied. "Since I was 28. And in all that time you never sought to have your compositions published? Performed?" Elena shook her head. "It never seemed... they were just for me. Personal things. Music is never just for oneself," Maestro Vitali said firmly. "Even the most personal expression is meant to be heard. Otherwise, why give it form at all? Why not keep it locked in your mind?" Elena had no answer. She had never thought of her compositions as meant for others. They were like diary entries, private reflections of her innermost feelings. "Your technique is not perfect," the maestro continued, "and your compositions lack some of the structural sophistication one might expect from formally trained composers. But there is something else in your music, something genuine and unaffected." He turned to Lily. "You were right to bring her to my attention." Lily beamed. "Thank you, maestro. What happens now?" Elena asked, still uncertain whether his assessment was positive or negative. Maestro Vitali checked his watch. "Now I have another appointment. But before I go, I would like your permission to have copies made of these." He tapped the folders. "I know someone at Rivera Publishing who might be interested in seeing them." Elena stared at him in disbelief. "Rivera Publishing? But they produce music for professional pianists, yes, but also for students and amateurs. Your teaching pieces especially might find a place in their catalog, and perhaps some of your more personal works as well." "I don't know what to say," Elena whispered. "Say yes," Lily urged from across the room. "Say yes, Elena." The maestro held up his hand. "Do not decide in haste. Think about it. These compositions have been private for many years. Making them public is not a small thing." He pulled a card from his pocket. "Call me tomorrow with your decision. If you agree, leave your folders with Lily today. If not, no harm done." He extended his hand and Elena shook it, still in a daze. His grip was firm and brief. "One more thing," he said, pausing at the door. "Tonight I am giving a small dinner at my apartment for a few colleagues. Nothing formal. If you are still in the city, perhaps you would join us. 7 o'clock. He wrote an address on the back of his card. "Lily can show you the way." Before Elena could respond, he was gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of his cologne and the impossible reality of what had just happened. Lily rushed over and hugged her. "Did you hear that? He wants to show your music to Rivera, and he invited you to dinner. Do you know how rare that is? The maestro almost never invites anyone to his home, especially not someone he just met." Elena sank onto the piano bench, her legs suddenly weak. "This can't be happening. Things like this don't happen to people like me." "Why not?" Lily asked, sitting beside her. "Why shouldn't something wonderful happen to you? You've spent your whole life giving music to others, to students like me. Maybe it's your turn to have your music given back to the world." Elena looked down at the maestro's card in her hand, at the elegant address written in his precise handwriting. "I didn't pack anything suitable for dinner with a maestro," she said weakly. Lily laughed. "That's what you're worried about? We'll go shopping this afternoon. I treat. Lily, I couldn't. You can and you will. Consider it 30 years of overdue piano lesson payments. I should have been paying double for how much you taught me." Despite her swirling emotions, Elena had to smile. The eager 12-year-old girl she had once taught had grown into this confident, generous woman. "All right," she conceded, "but something simple. Nothing too fancy." "Of course," Lily agreed, though the gleam in her eye suggested she had other ideas. "Now, should we leave your folders with the receptionist, or do you need more time to think about the maestro's offer?" Elena looked at her 3 folders, green, red, and blue, containing 30 years of her heart translated into music. For so long they had been her private companions. The thought of strangers seeing them, judging them, perhaps dismissing them, made her stomach tighten with anxiety. But then she remembered how it felt to play After Rain last night, the connection she had felt with the audience, the way the music had filled the concert hall like a living thing. For a brief moment she had shared something real with those strangers, something true. "Leave them," she said with sudden certainty. "Leave them with the receptionist. I'll call the maestro tomorrow, but I already know what I'm going to say." Lily squeezed her hand. "I think I do too." 6 months later, Elena sat in the green room of the Hartwick Concert Hall, her fingers absently tracing patterns on the sleeve of her new dark purple dress. Through the walls, she could hear the murmur of the gathering audience. A copy of Moments in Time piano compositions by Elena Cortez lay open on the table beside her. Its pages crisp and professionally printed, so different from her handwritten sheets. 10 minutes? Ms. Cortez, said a young woman with a headset, poking her head through the door. Elena nodded, her throat too dry for words. How had she arrived here? Sometimes the past 6 months felt like a dream, a beautiful, terrifying dream that had swept her from her quiet life into something she barely recognized. The dinner at Maestro Vitali's apartment had been the beginning. She remembered entering his elegant home, clutching Lily's arm, wearing a simple black dress they had found that afternoon. The maestro had introduced her to his guests, a music professor from the university, 2 concert pianists, and an editor from Rivera Publishing. They had been kind, curious about this unknown piano teacher the maestro had discovered. After dinner, at the maestro's insistence, Elena had played for them on his grand piano. 3 pieces, After Rain, First Snow, and a gentle lullaby she had composed for her first student's newborn daughter years ago. When she finished, the editor from Rivera had handed her his card. "Call me Monday," he had said. "I think we might have a place for your work." The weeks that followed had been a whirlwind. The contract with Rivera, the careful selection of pieces for her first published collection, the recording sessions at a small studio where Elena played her compositions for a professional sound engineer. All while she continued teaching her regular students, fitting her new life around the old one that still anchored her. The door opened again, and Lily entered, resplendent in a formal gown. "Almost time." "How are you feeling?" "Like I might throw up," Elena admitted with a shaky laugh. Lily sat beside her and took her hands. "You'll be wonderful, just like in rehearsal, just like you've played these pieces hundreds of times at home. There weren't 300 people watching me at home. Forget about them. Play for yourself like you always have." A knock at the door interrupted them. Maestro Vitali entered, impeccable in his tuxedo. His stern face softened slightly when he saw Elena. "The hall is full," he said. "Many from the music department at the university. Some critics. Your students as well, I believe." Elena's eyes widened. "My students are here?" "Ms. Rodriguez arranged a bus. They are quite excited." Ms. Rodriguez was the principal at the elementary school where Elena taught weekly group lessons. The thought of her young students in the audience, watching their teacher with wide, expectant eyes, somehow calmed her nerves slightly. They at least would applaud no matter what happened. 5 minutes, called the stagehand through the door. Maestro Vitali approached Elena and placed a hand briefly on her shoulder, a rare gesture of affection from the usually reserved man. "Remember what we discussed in our sessions? Technical perfection is not the goal. Emotional truth is what matters in your music." Over the past months, the maestro had worked with Elena once a week, refining her technique without altering the essential character of her playing. He had been a demanding teacher, but a respectful one, treating her compositions with a seriousness that still surprised her. "I'll try to remember," Elena promised. "Good. Now come. It is time." Elena followed the maestro and Lily into the hallway. The sounds from the auditorium grew louder. People settling into their seats, programs rustling, the low buzz of conversation. Elena's heart pounded so hard she was certain they could hear it. At the edge of the stage, Lily hugged her quickly. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered before slipping away to take her seat in the front row. Maestro Vitali gave her one last nod. "I will see you after." And then Elena was alone in the wings, waiting for her cue. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, thinking of her small house on Maple Street, of Carlos who had believed in her talent, of her students and their eager faces. She thought of all the moments in her life that had led to this evening, moments of joy and sorrow, of ordinary days and special occasions, all translated into the music she would play tonight. "Ladies and gentlemen, Hartwick Concert Hall is pleased to present an evening of original compositions performed by the composer, Elena Cortez." The spotlight appeared on the gleaming concert grand at center stage. Elena stepped out of the darkness into its warm glow. The applause washed over her as she crossed to the piano and took a small bow before sitting. For a moment she couldn't move. The vastness of the hall, the hundreds of eyes watching her, the absolute silence that had fallen. It was overwhelming. Then she caught sight of Lily in the front row, giving her an encouraging smile. Next to Lily sat the elegant woman with the pearls who had sat beside Elena at the recital 6 months ago. Beyond them, Elena could make out a row of her students, their faces shining with excitement, and behind them, familiar faces from her small town. Neighbors, parents of students, even Mrs. Patel, who had heard her playing through the open window that day. Elena placed her hands on the keys. These people had come to hear her music, not to judge her, but to share in the moments she had captured in her compositions. With that thought, her nervousness began to fade, replaced by a strange calm. She had something to give them tonight, something honest and true. She began with Morning Light, a piece inspired by dawn breaking over her garden. As she played, she felt the familiar connection with the music, that sense of the notes flowing not just from her fingers but from somewhere deeper. The magnificent piano responded to her touch, filling the concert hall with clear, resonant tones. One piece followed another, some from her newly published collection, others that would appear in future volumes. Elena lost track of time, lost in the conversation between herself, the piano, and the silent audience. She played pieces inspired by childhood memories, by changing seasons, by moments of connection with her students. And near the end of the program, she played After Rain, the piece that had started her on this unexpected journey. As the final notes faded, there was a moment of absolute silence. Then the applause began, tentative at first, then building into something that made Elena's chest tighten with emotion. She stood and turned to face the audience, her vision blurring slightly with unshed tears. In the front row, Lily was on her feet, applauding wildly. Beside her, Maestro Vitali stood more sedately, but his face held an expression Elena had rarely seen, a look of genuine approval. And throughout the hall, people were rising, their applause continuing as Elena took another bow. She had prepared an encore, a new piece called Unexpected Path that she had composed just weeks ago. As the applause finally quieted, she returned to the piano and played this final offering, a piece that spoke of surprise turns in life's journey, of doors opening when least expected, of finding new purpose in later chapters. The reception afterward was held in the lobby. Elena stood beside a display of her published music, signing copies and accepting congratulations from a steady stream of well-wishers. Music students asked technical questions about her compositions. Parents wanted to know if she would be taking new students. She would, but fewer than before. A representative from the state university asked if she would consider guest teaching a composition seminar next semester. Through it all, Elena felt a curious mixture of joy and disbelief. This was not the life she had imagined for herself all those years teaching piano in her living room. Yet somehow it felt right, as if she had finally found the proper outlet for the music that had always lived inside her. Near the end of the evening, when the crowd had thinned, Maestro Vitali approached with an older gentleman Elena didn't recognize. Ms. Cortez, I would like you to meet Dr. Howard from the Philadelphia Symphony. He has a proposition for you. Dr. Howard shook her hand warmly. Maestro Vitali shared some of your compositions with me last month. I was particularly struck by Autumn Remembrance. It has a quality that I believe would translate beautifully to a full orchestral arrangement. Elena blinked in surprise. Orchestral arrangement? Yes, with your permission, of course. The symphony is planning a concert series featuring new American composers next season. We would like to include your work. I don't know what to say. Dr. Howard smiled.
Say yes.
Your music deserves to be heard in all its possible forms. Over his shoulder, Elena caught sight of Lily watching from across the lobby, her former student's face alight with pride and affection. Beyond Lily stood a group of Elena's current students, still in their Sunday best, trying not to fidget as their parents chatted nearby. These children who came to her living room each week to learn scales and simple tunes, would they someday sit in this very concert hall and remember their first teacher? Yes, Elena said, turning back to Dr. Howard. Yes, I would be honored. Later that night, after the last guest had departed and the cleanup crew had begun their work, Elena found herself alone on the stage once more. The magnificent concert grand stood in the dim spotlight, its lid closed now, its moment of glory past until the next performance. Elena ran her hand along its smooth surface, remembering how it had felt to play her music on this instrument. in this hall, for an audience who had come specifically to hear her work.